Governor Spitzer's money transfers to the prostitution ring raised red flags with federal agents. There are 49 billion debit and credit card transactions a year. 1 in every 3,000 are reported by banks and credit unions. The government keeps a very close eye on all financial transactions, even yours. CBS News correspondent Nancy Cordes reports.
Every time you go to the ATM, or shop for a sweater, or just charge a cup of coffee, that transaction gets screened by your bank using sophisticated software that searches for suspicious payments or patterns. Here's an example.
So you're looking at actually multiple transactions, that each one of them is actually legit, small, not big. But if you look at them all together, you actually start to ask yourself, why would someone actually move this amount of money instead of one wire and actually multiple wire?
A troubling series of transactions might trigger a suspicious activity report. Banks send about 1 million such reports to federal investigators every year. And they don't have to be big sums. Since 9/11, banks have started scrutinizing those smaller payments, looking for evidence of money laundering, bank fraud, and terrorist financing.
It really is a balancing act because, first and foremost, we want to protect people's privacy. But we do want to work with law enforcement, and we do want to help them fight illegal activity and, above all, fight terrorism.
Most people will never run afoul of the security software. That's because an odd transaction here or there isn't enough to ring alarm bells. It's weighed against something called your risk score. And every account holder, you, me, everyone, has one.
Are they a brand new customer? Have they had suspicious activities in the past? Are they a international customer?
And there's one other important group of customers who often get assigned high risk scores. They're called PEPs, or politically exposed persons. These are judges, party officials, politicians, people who might be targeted for bribes. The ultimate irony is that as a governor and former attorney general, Eliot Spitzer would have known better than anyone that he was a PEP, and therefore that his financial dealings would be an open book. Nancy Cordes, CBS News, Washington.
Want to talk more about the monitoring of financial transactions? We're joined by Mike German of the American Civil Liberties Union and terrorism expert Paul Kurtz. Paul, let me start with you. How in the world could Eliot Spitzer not have known he was a PEP and not have known about his own risk score?
It's hard to believe that he wouldn't have some insight into how the system works. He obviously does. And the question now facing prosecutors is whether or not he was structuring payments. There are two levels here. There's monitoring that's done by banks, and then there's reporting that goes up to federal authorities about suspicious transactions. He would have knowledge in both those places as to what exactly banks can do and what type of access federal prosecutors or federal investigators would have.
And Mike German, there are millions and millions of Americans who are waking up this morning with their jaws dropped down thinking, so the government really knows this much about me? Should they?
Yes, absolutely they should. I mean, there's been an exponential increase in the amount of these suspicious activity reports that are filed. Literally, in 1996, there were just over 62,000. In 2006, 10 years later, there were over 1 million. So, certainly with that kind of volume, the chances of capturing purely innocent transactions is very high.
So there's a balance. There has to be weighed here between innocent transactions and, quite honestly, this is all about terrorism again, isn't it?
Well, you would think that, but if you look at the prosecutions, there are only a few dozen terrorism financing prosecutions every year. So you have millions of these these transactions being reported, and only a few dozen terrorism prosecutions, only a few hundred money laundering prosecutions. So this isn't a very effective enforcement tool, which may be what came into consideration is when you make a huge haystack, the chance of finding a needle becomes smaller, not larger.
Yeah, interesting. Paul Kurtz, is there any way for normal people to avoid this sort of stuff?
Well, first, Harry, I want to go back on one point. This isn't just all about terrorism. This program has been put in place to catch drug traffickers, organized crime. Sure. It was retuned after 9/11 to go after terrorists. Americans need to understand that their banks are looking after their financial transactions to protect their customers and themselves.
Right.
And then the federal authorities need the insight in order to piece together what patterns of suspicious activity in order to pick out potential terrorist acts. And so there is a balance. But the real question here, Harry, at the end of the day, is oversight. We should collect the information, but there needs to be appropriate oversight.
So interesting. Paul Kurtz, Mike German, thank you both for your time this morning.